Rule 20, the chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote on the yeas and nays are ordered or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. Gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 835.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 835, a bill to provide a one-time grant for the operation, security, and maintenance of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum at the World Trade Center to commemorate the events and honor the victims of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on H.R. 835, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of Representative Lalota's bipartisan bill, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Act. This important legislation honors the victims of the horrendous 9/11 attacks by providing a one-time grant to assist with security costs for the 9/11 Memorial and Museum located in Lower Manhattan. The National September 11th Memorial and Museum occupies the former World Trade Center site. This unique facility serves as the principal tribute of remembrance and honor to the nearly 3,000 people killed in the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001 and February 26, 1993. A prominent feature of the museum is in an art installation with the quote, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." These words are much more than a quote. They are a solemn promise from each and every American that we will never forget and will not allow our future Americans to forget the tragic events of 9/11. More than 23 years after these horrific attacks, we still remember the innocent men, women, and children who perished on that September morning. And we know that time has not erased the scars, both visible and invisible, carried by the survivors, families of victims, and all who watched those horrific attacks unfold. Representative Lalota's legislation will help ensure that the memories of those we lost on 9/11 remain eternal by providing a one-time grant of between $5 million and $10 million to assist with security costs for the memorial and museum. As the location of one of the most high-profile terrorist attacks in American history, the museum shoulders more than $1 million per month in security costs to protect visitors and the exhibits throughout the museum. This grant, which would come from the Department of Homeland Security's existing appropriations, will help reduce the burden of those significant security costs. I'd like to thank Representative Lalota for his efforts to advance this legislation. As a native New Yorker and veteran of the global war on terrorism, he has a profound respect and understanding for what it means to never forget the events of September 11, 2001. His bill would help the 9/11 Memorial and Museum continue operations, fund safety measures, and provide free admission for military veterans, first responders, and victims' families. H.R. 835 passed the House unanimously in the 118th Congress, and I urge my colleagues to support it again today. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the 9/11 Memorial and Music Act. September 11th remains a horrific, indelible moment etched in our nation's history. We will forever strive to honor the innocent lives lost and reckon with the sacrifices of so many. That's why House Democrats have stepped up time and time again to support the ongoing management needs of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York City. Located at Ground Zero, this site is the principal tribute of remembrance to honor the lives lost on this tragic day, as well as the lives lost in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. It is a hallowed ground and deserves our support. And over the years, Congress has provided significant financial support to the nonprofit organization that operates it. This bill continues that tradition by calling on Congress to authorize the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to provide a one-time grant for security, operation, and maintenance of the grounds. I say calling on because one big caveat is that the bill does not actually create this grant program. Due to the Freedom Caucus's budget protocols, the bill instead clarifies at the end that the grant program shall not be authorized until subsequent legislation authorizes it. And that, of course, it will not be funded until a third bill passes to appropriate the money. Those are the fiscal gymnastics necessary to comply with Republican spending protocols. Yes, even the 9/11 memorial gets only lip service and window dressing. To be crystal clear, this bill doesn't do anything at all. And of course, even if Congress someday passes a bill to authorize the grant envisioned here, and then passes a third bill to appropriate the money for this grant, we have seen in recent days that some Republicans believe that congressional appropriations are completely optional. Republicans in the White House are illegally stopping vital funding that Congress has ordered to be spent, and their friends in Congress are defending them. The chairman of the House Appropriations Committee said last week that all the bills in his jurisdiction that Congress passes are actually, quote, not laws. So if we ever do create this grant, I hope no one in New York makes any enemies in this administration, because apparently the administration thinks it can just ignore Congress and block the money. Madam Speaker, I want to be clear that my criticisms are not aimed at the sponsor of this bill. He is doing everything he can to advocate for the museum under the unreasonable constraints of the Freedom Caucus and the administration. I commend his efforts. Finally, I know that note that the 9/11 Museum has faced criticism from local community members since its opening for some of its content. We continue to encourage the museum's management to engage with stakeholders to ensure that the site is welcoming and representative for all. Perhaps that is something we can address in the multiple pieces of future legislation that will be necessary to actually make this grant a reality. I wish we were here today to actually do something to support and improve the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, but unfortunately that's not the case. On balance, this bill doesn't do any harm either, and it attempts to bring attention to a very important effort, so I will be voting for it. But I am disappointed that this is where things are. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the lead sponsor of the bill, Mr. Lilota.
The gentleman from New York, Mr. Lilota, is recognized for 4 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman from Arkansas for yielding, the chairman of the House Resources Committee for supporting the bill, but most importantly, for supporting the 9/11 families. Madam Speaker, September 11th, 2001 was not just a day of immense loss, it was a day that changed our nation forever. Nearly 3,000 innocent lives were taken from us in an act of unimaginable evil. First responders, driven by duty and selflessness, rushed into danger, and many never returned. Families were shattered, communities forever altered, and the scars of that day remain with us even now. But from that darkness came an incredible light, the resilience of the American spirit. We vowed on that fateful Tuesday morning never to forget and promised to honor the victims and the heroes who gave everything in the face of terror. Today, we have a chance to uphold that promise. The 9/11 Memorial Museum stands as a sacred place, a place of reflection, education, and unity. It is where generations can learn about the courage and sacrifice that defines us as a nation. It tells us the stories of firefighters who climbed up while others ran down, the passengers on Flight 93 who fought back, and everyday Americans who became heroes. However, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum remains a top target for terrorists and faces financial challenges stemming from the COVID-19 shutdown that threatens its ability to keep up its essential work. My bill, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Act, directs the Department of Homeland Security to award a one-time grant to the National September 11 Memorial and Museum for the security, operation, and maintenance of its facilities and grounds. As a condition of receiving this grant, the museum must provide free admission for active and retired members of the armed forces, individuals who are registered first responders to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and the family members and victims of the attacks. It also provides for dedicated free admission hours for the general public at least once a week and allows for annual federal audits of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum's financial statements. This ought not to be a partisan issue. This is about honoring our history, protecting our legacy, and teaching future generations the lessons of 9/11. We must not let the memory of that day fade. We cannot allow the heroism, the sacrifice, and the unity that followed be forgotten. Supporting this bill means standing with the families of the fallen, with our first responders, with every American who still carries the weight of that day on their hearts. I urge my colleagues to join me in ensuring that we keep our promise. Let's pass the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Act and uphold our commitment to the American people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I have no further request for time. I'm prepared to close and continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, H.R. 835 ensures that the hallowed grounds on which the 9/11 Memorial and Museum are located remain a place of remembrance and honor for families, first responders, and Americans from across our great nation. I urge the adoption of the bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 835? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 42.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 42, a bill to amend the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act to exclude certain payments to aged, blind, or disabled Alaska Natives or descendants of Alaska Natives from being used to determine eligibility for certain programs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on H.R. 42, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 42 would exclude the amounts distributed or benefits provided from the Alaska Native Corporation or the ANC Settlement Trust to Alaska Natives who are blind, disabled, 65 years or older, or their descendants when determining eligibility for means-tested federal benefits. Federal means-tested benefits include programs such as Supplemental Security Income, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and federal housing benefits. In 1988, Congress amended the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA, to exclude the first $2,000 any Alaska Native individual receives from an ANC when determining eligibility for means-tested federal benefits. Additionally, the 1988 amendments authorized ANCs to establish settlement trusts to distribute benefits to Alaska Native beneficiaries. Yet, benefits from settlement trust were not excluded when determining recipient eligibility for government assistance programs, as with the first $2,000 of other benefits Alaska Natives can receive from ANCs. ANCs have brought forward concerns with this discrepancy and the impact it has on Alaska Natives, particularly those who are aged, blind, or disabled. Often these individuals are placed in the position of choosing between accepting the settlement trust income or qualifying for government assistance programs. H.R. 42 would address this oversight and exclude the amounts or benefits distributed to aged, blind, or disabled Alaska Natives from settlement trusts when determining eligibility for means-tested federal benefits. I want to thank the sponsor of this legislation, our freshman member from Alaska, Mr. Begich, for his leadership in addressing this important issue and for introducing this bill on the first day of the 119th Congress so it could quickly be brought to the floor for consideration. I support the bill and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of Representative Begich's H.R. 42, the Alaska Native Settlement Trust Eligibility Act. Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1971 to address land claims in the state of Alaska. Per an agreement, Alaska Native corporations were established and the federal government transferred to them 44 million acres and $962.5 million in compensation funds. However, when an individual receives a distribution from an Alaska Native Settlement Trust, part of this law requires that the federal government to include that distribution when determining the person's eligibility for various governmental programs, such as for housing and supplemental income and nutritional assistance. H.R. 42 would amend the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act to exclude from that calculation any such distributions provided to aged, blind, or disabled Alaska Natives. These are critical services that support the livelihoods of some of the most vulnerable Alaska Natives. Over the years, the failure to address this issue has often forced Alaska Natives to choose between receiving the settlement trust benefits they are entitled to or qualifying for need-based federal benefits. H.R. 42 would solve this problem, which is great news. I will remind my colleagues, though, that this bill, of course, doesn't remove the risk that this administration will try to illegally freeze or pause anyone's federal benefits. and this bill will be of small comfort if Republicans make good on their promises to cut need-based federal programs to pay for their billionaire tax breaks. These aren't hypotheticals. The House Republican Study Committee's budget proposal last fall called for cutting SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, by about 22%, for example. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, but I also urge them to oppose the lawlessness we've been seeing in the administration and to oppose cuts to programs that help the most vulnerable people in our communities. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alaska, the lead sponsor of the bill, Mr. Begich.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 3 minutes. Right. Alaska is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of my bill, H.R. 42, the Alaska Native Settlement Trust Eligibility Act. This legislation makes a simple but necessary fix to federal law, ensuring that certain benefits distributed through Alaska Native Corporation Settlement Trusts do not unreasonably disqualify vulnerable Alaskans from receiving assistance. For decades, Alaskan Native corporations have provided vital support to their shareholders, including through settlement trusts, an essential tool Congress authorized in 1988 to deliver benefits in a structured, perpetual way. However, due to an oversight in the law, payments from these trusts are counted as income when determining eligibility for federal programs like Supplemental Security Income, SNAP, and housing assistance. That means visually impaired and disabled Alaskan natives and elders are forced to make an impossible choice: accept the benefits from their settlement trusts or maintain their access to critical assistance. By ensuring that these benefits are not counted as income, H.R. 42 aligns settlement trust distributions with other Alaskan Native benefits already excluded from eligibility calculations. It upholds the original intent of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and protects the most vulnerable in need in our Alaska Native communities. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan, common sense legislation. Let's ensure that no one has to choose between their critical assistance and their well-being. Thank you, and I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I have no further requests for time. I'm prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, again, this legislation would ensure that amounts distributed or benefits provided from Alaska Native Corporation Settlement Trust to Alaska Natives who are blind, disabled, or elders aged 65 and older or their descendants are excluded when determining eligibility for means-tested federal benefits. Again, I thank Mr. Begich for his work on an important issue for Alaska Natives. I urge adoption of the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 42? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 43.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 43, a bill to amend the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act to provide that village corporations shall not be required to convey land and trust to the state of Alaska for the establishment of municipal corporations and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on H.R. 43, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 43, the Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act of 2025, would amend the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA, to return lands back to Alaska Native Village corporations that are currently held in trust by the state of Alaska for future municipalities. ANCSA was enacted to settle Aboriginal land claims of Alaska Natives, and in doing so, Alaska Native corporations were created to receive land and disperse payments to Alaska Natives. ANCSA required Alaska Native village corporations that received land to convey some land to an existing municipality. If no municipality existed, the land was conveyed to the state of Alaska to be held in trust for a future municipality. Over the past 53 years, only 8 village corporations have seen a municipality created, with the most recent municipality created in 1995. This leaves 11,500 acres throughout 83 villages unable to be developed because it must be held in trust by Alaska in perpetuity for the unlikely creation of a municipality. H.R. 43 would end this requirement for village corporations to reconvey lands for a potential municipality and return land already conveyed under this provision to village corporations. If returned, village corporations anticipate developing this land for housing, community buildings, and other economic development projects. There is widespread support for H.R. 43 within the state of Alaska. The Alaska State Senate unanimously passed Senate Resolution number 13 on May 9, 2024, which encouraged the enactment of federal legislation to return the conveyed lands to Alaska Native village corporations. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy is also supportive of the legislative fix that H.R. 43 would provide. Again, I want to thank the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Begich, for his work to introduce this bill on the first day of the 119th Congress so that we could bring it to the floor quickly. I appreciate his diligence and swift work on behalf of Alaska, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of Representative Begich's H.R. 43, the Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act of 2025. Under current law, when an Alaska Native Village Corporation receives land pursuant to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, then the village corporation must convey certain lands to its municipal government. If none exists, then the law requires them to convey the land to the state of Alaska to be held in trust for when a municipality is established in the future. The problem is that in many remote Alaska Native communities, it is unlikely that a municipal government will ever be formed, which means the land being held in trust won't ever be used for its intended purpose. In fact, since the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1971, 101 village corporations have had lands held in trust by the state, but only 8 of those villages have incorporated into a municipality, and none have done so since 1995. This bill would remove the requirement that Alaska Native village corporations convey land in trust to the state of Alaska for the hypothetical establishment of municipal corporations, and it would allow village corporations to have the state of Alaska reconvey such lands back to them. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, which will allow communities themselves to make decisions about how best to utilize their own lands. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alaska, the lead sponsor of the bill, Mr. Begich.
Gentleman from Alaska is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 43, the Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act. This bill corrects a decades-old oversight in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act to ensure Alaska Native communities can fully use their own land. In 1971, ANCSA granted fee-simple land ownership to Alaska Natives, resolving historic land claims and enabling statehood land entitlements. However, Section 14C3 required Native village corporations to transfer land to the state of Alaska to be held in trust for future municipalities. More than 50 years later, only 8 of 101 affected villages have incorporated, leaving 11,500 acres and 83 villages frozen in bureaucratic limbo. H.R. 43 eliminates this outdated requirement and returns these lands to village corporations, allowing for housing, economic development, and community expansion. This bill restores self-determination, ensuring Alaska Natives, not government bureaucracy, decide how to use their own land. This legislation has broad support, as was mentioned, including from the Alaska governor and state legislature, and was unanimously passed by the Senate in the last Congress. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense fix and allow these lands to be used by their owners to support their own communities. And I yield back.
Speaker, I have no further requests for time. I'm prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, again, this legislation would amend ANCSA to return the land in question to impacted Alaska Native village corporations and eliminate the unnecessary land conveyance requirements in statute. I want to thank Mr. Begich for his leadership in working on this important issue for his constituents in Alaska. I urge adoption of H.R. 43 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 43? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is... For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2026.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 226, a bill to take certain federal lands in Tennessee into trust for the benefit of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and to include extraneous material on H.R. 226, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of H.R. 226, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Historic Lands Reacquisition Act, introduced by my friend from Tennessee, Congressman Fleshman. H.R. 226 places approximately 96 acres of Tennessee Valley Authority land and permanent easements along the shores of the Little Tennessee River and Tellico Reservoir in Monroe County, Tennessee, into trust for the benefit of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. These areas include the Sequoia Museum, Chota Memorial, and Tennessee Memorial. Maybe Mr. Fleshman can pronounce those better than me. And land to support these properties and cultural programs. The parcels placed into trust under the bill will be used to memorialize and interpret the history of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is one of 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes. Their ancestral homeland includes substantial parts of 7 eastern states, including Tennessee, and the 57,000-acre Qualla Boundary Cherokee Indian Reservation in North Carolina. In 1979, after the TVA completed the Tellico Dam, the tribe approached the TVA about lands that were historically significant to the tribe and impacted by the dam. In 1984 and 1986, the tribe and the TVA reached an informal agreement that allowed the tribe to manage 2 easements, including the Sequoia Museum. H.R. 226 helps this cause by transferring approximately 76 acres of historically significant lands from the TVA to the U.S. government to be held in trust for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. It also creates 2 permanent easements over TVA property held in trust for the tribe to create recreational trails between the sites. This legislation will give the Eastern Band greater control over the historic homelands and the opportunity to memorialize the history and culture of the Cherokee people. Gaming, pursuant to the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, will be prohibited on the land. The bill also ensures that the TVA will be able to continue its river control and development activities to power the Tennessee Valley region. I urge adoption of the measure and commend the gentleman from Tennessee for his continued work on this important legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Historic Lands Reacquisition Act, introduced by Representative Fleischman of Tennessee. This bill would place specified lands and easements in Monroe County, Tennessee, into trust of the benefit of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. These lands include the Sequoia Museum, the Chota Memorial, the Tennessee Memorial, and land that support these properties and the tribe's cultural programs. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, one of 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes and the only federally recognized tribe in North Carolina, has ancestral homelands spanning across 7 eastern states, including Tennessee. In 1979, the construction of the Tellico Dam by the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, flooded large portions of the tribe's ancestral lands along the Little Tennessee River, submerging sacred sites and archaeological remains. Among the losses were the historic Overhill Cherokee towns, which served as the Cherokee capitals during the 1700s. While the Eastern Band can never reclaim the lands and sacred sites lost to flooding, other historically significant locations in the region remain in need of protection and preservation. This bill would address this critical need by transferring approximately 76 acres of culturally significant lands from the TVA to the U.S. government to be held in trust for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. The bill would also establish 2 permanent easements over TVA property to be held in trust for the tribe, facilitating the creation of recreational trails that will be between these important sites. Passing this legislation would grant the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians greater control over their historic homelands, enabling them to preserve and honor their rich history and culture. It would represent an essential step towards safeguarding these culturally significant sites for future generations. I do want to remind my colleagues, though, that these kinds of land arrangements don't happen by magic when we pass a bill like this one. Even if this bill becomes law, we will need actual staffing in the executive branch to carry it out. Unfortunately, in the past week, we've already seen basic government functions halted or put at risk, from reckless orders to freeze spending, fire government workers, or place them on administrative leave, and more. Orders that in many cases are unconstitutional and illegal. I do urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill, but I also urge them to join Democrats in calling for an end to the paralyzing chaos we've been seeing from the White House. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, the lead sponsor of the bill, Mr. Fleshman.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I rise in support of H.R. 226, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Historic Lands Reacquisition Act. I thank the chairman and the ranking member for their kind words in support of this bill. Madam Speaker, this legislation has passed this House 4 times, and must pass again today. It needs to go to the United States Senate, and it needs to go to President Trump's desk for signature. It has been far too long. The Eastern Band of Cherokee have been waiting and had a lot of promises made to them over the years which have been broken. This is a great bill for America, and it is a great bill that we honor our wonderful Eastern Band of Cherokees. In my home state, the great state of Tennessee, it takes its name from Tanasi, a historic overhill Cherokee settlement in present-day Monroe County, Tennessee, in the 3rd District of Tennessee, which I am privileged to represent. Tanasi served as the Cherokee capital as early as 1721. Unfortunately, due to misguided federal policies, the Cherokee were forced from their homes in Tennessee and surrounding states. This tragic period in American history led to the Trail of Tears, a journey in which 15,000 Cherokees were forcibly marched to the Indian Territory. My bill returns important historic sites back to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the tribal nation comprised of descendants of these Cherokees who resisted removal in the Great Smoky Mountains and escaped the Trail of Tears. It is on these same lands where the Eastern Band of Cherokees have for decades honored the birthplace of Sequoia, whose likeness we all in this House have the opportunity to pass as we make our way from the rotunda in our Capitol to the House floor. Let me be clear. My bill, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Historic Lands Reacquisition Act, is limited and targeted. It restores 76.1 acres of federally owned Tennessee Valley Authority land to the Eastern Band of Cherokees and will grant 2 permanent easements over TVA property to be held in trust for the tribe to create recreational trails between the sites. Madam Speaker, this is about honoring history and keeping our promises. I strongly urge members of both chambers to understand the importance of the Cherokee tribal land preservation and support H.R. 226 so it may be brought to President Trump's desk promptly. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Arkansas.
Madam Speaker, I have no further requests for time. I'm prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, H.R. 226 is a common-sense bill that facilitates greater control for the Eastern Band of Cherokee over their sacred and historic homelands in Tennessee. It ensures the protection of their timeless heritage, culture, and tradition, and allows them to memorialize the history and culture of the Cherokee people. This tribe has worked with the Tennessee Valley Authority for over 3 decades on this issue, and this legislation is long overdue. I will echo the words of my colleague from Tennessee and say that the Senate needs to take this bill up and act on it when we pass it again. Again, I want to thank Mr. Fleshman for his leadership on the matter. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 226? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 776.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 776, a bill to reauthorize the Nutria Eradication and Control Act of 2003.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and the gentleman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on H.R. 776, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of Representative Harder's legislation, which would reauthorize the Nutria eradication program at existing funding levels through 2030. This bill is identical to the one passed in the House during the last week of the 118th Congress. Unfortunately, it failed to receive a vote in the Senate. I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak again in support of this important legislation. Nutria are invasive rodents native to South America that were imported to the United States in 1899 for fur production. Since then, the Nutria population has exploded in places like Northern California, Oregon, and the Louisiana bayous, as well as the Chesapeake Bay and Eastern Shore ecosystems. These rodents eat, dig, and trample healthy wetland habitats, causing significant erosion and habitat damage to native ecosystems. When this legislation was first enacted in 2003, an estimated 17% of the Chesapeake Bay's marshlands had already been destroyed by Nutria. Due to the aid of this program, Nutria eradication efforts have been very successful. For example, in Maryland, they have been declared eradicated. In Louisiana, where more than 432,000 acres were damaged or destroyed by Nutria from 2002 to 2021, over 5 million Nutria have been taken. Passing the legislation would allow these successful efforts to continue. I want to thank Representative Valadeo for co-leading this legislation, which will benefit California's Central Valley in its work to eradicate Nutria. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 776, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, which would reauthorize the Nutria Eradication and Control Act through fiscal year 2030 to ensure that Maryland, Louisiana, and California can manage and eradicate this destructive invasive species. Nutria are an invasive species of large semi-aquatic rodents found in coastal wetlands along the Gulf of Mexico, the East Coast, California, and other wetland areas within the United States. Nutria were initially introduced into the United States in the 1930s for fur production. However, their rapid breeding and destructive tendencies toward native wetland vegetation has led to extensive erosion, displacement of native species, breached levees, and the introduction of diseases and parasites that threaten humans, livestock, and pets. These actions pose severe threats to our national wetlands, which are essential habitats for waterfowl and other wildlife and act as buffers from extreme weather events. According to estimates, if measures had not been adopted to control and eradicate Nutria in Maryland's Chesapeake Bay, Nutria could have destroyed 17% of the bay's marshes in just 50 years. In 2003, the Nutria Eradication and Control Act authorized the Secretary of the Interior to provide financial assistance to Maryland and Louisiana for a program to eradicate or control Nutria and restore marshland damaged by Nutria. In 2020, Congress passed my colleague Representative Harder's bill to amend the Nutria Eradication and Control Act to include California, which faced a rapidly expanding breeding population of Nutria in the San Joaquin Valley and adjacent areas. That bill also gave the Secretary of the Interior discretion to provide funding to states adversely affected by growing nutria populations through fiscal year 2025. This bill before us today would extend that authority to fiscal year 2030. The Nutria Eradication and Control Act has significantly reduced nutria populations in all 3 states. In Maryland, nutria were entirely eradicated from the Chesapeake Bay in 2022. In California, captures peaked in 2020 and have been steadily declining, but they are not yet fully eradicated. I urge my colleagues to support this bill so this important work can continue, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I commend Representative Harder for his bipartisan work and his hard work to bring this important bill to the floor. I have no further requests for time. I'm prepared to close and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from California, the sponsor of the bill, Representative Harder.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of my bill, the Nutria Eradication and Control Reauthorization Act of 2025, and because communities in California and across the country are in a war right now against these giant swamp rats. My bill would reauthorize funding to strengthen eradication efforts for the invasive swamp rat nutria, which is destroying our levees, harming local farmland, and infecting our very drinking water. These 40-pound monsters are larger than the average dog. They eat 25% of their body weight every day and can reproduce 200 offspring every single year. In 2023 alone, 78% of the nutria found in California were in newly infested areas, threatening our entire way of life. The only way to stop their spreading invasion is to support local eradication and control efforts. In 2020, I was proud to work with President Trump to bring nutria eradication funding to California for the first time ever. But now, the funding is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year, right when we need it most. This comes at a time when our district is at a breaking point with nutria control efforts. Last year, more than 1,300 nutria were captured in California, which is a record-breaking year for takings in the state. We must reauthorize the Nutria Eradication and Control Act of 2003 to ensure states like California, Louisiana, and Florida are able to effectively curb the spread of this swamp rat once and for all. We know that following wildlife management techniques to control and eradicate nutria is effective. For instance, the Chesapeake Bay region successfully eradicated nutria from their communities in 2018 after almost 2 decades of infestation. We can't afford to let our foot off the gas in California now. It is up to us to reauthorize this program to ensure that nutria is not only eradicated in the Chesapeake Bay region, but in the United States. I urge my colleagues to pass my bill to stop this infestation from poisoning our waterways and damaging our communities. I also want to take the time to thank my colleague, Mr. Valadeo, for his tireless support of this legislation. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Speaker, H.R. 776 would reauthorize a program that is proven very effective in protecting our country's vital wetlands and marshes from destructive invasive species. While great work has been accomplished in controlling these invasive pests, or swamp rats as my colleague called them, continuing the Nutria eradication program is crucial to ensuring our native species of plants and animals can recover. And Madam Speaker, I would note that if gators and Cajuns can't eradicate these things from South Louisiana, we know that our friends in the Central Valley need help as well. I do want to thank my colleagues for their diligent work on this bill, and I urge all members to support this common sense, bipartisan legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 776? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
I request the yeas and the nays.
Thank you. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.